It's strange how things change over time. I, Alex, am 25 years old. I've been dating my girlfriend Luna, who is 23, for about 8 months now. When we first met, she was so vocal about equality and women's rights. She seemed generally positive, and that's what really drew me to her. I admired her strong principles. But as the months went on, I started to feel like some of her views were less about actual feminism and more about something else. It's a hard thing to pinpoint, but it was there, a subtle shift. Let me give you an example that really illustrates what I mean. She insists that we split all bills 50-50. Her reasoning is that she doesn't need a man to pay for her. And honestly, that works for me. I'm all for equality. I believe in fairness in a relationship, and I respected her independent spirit. However, the problem started to show itself in the details. When we go out to eat and the bill includes her $20 cocktail and my $5 beer, she still wants it split evenly. It seems like a small thing, I know, and for a while, I just let it go. I didn't want to make a fuss over a few dollars. I just wanted peace. But the other day, I suggested a different approach. I said, maybe we could take turns paying instead. It seemed like a fair compromise, a way to handle things without nitpicking every single item. Her response, though, completely surprised me. Out of nowhere, she said, "Well, men earn more on average, so you should cover more." I just stood there, a little stunned. What happened to equality? It felt like she was picking and choosing principles depending on what benefited her in that moment. It was a clear contradiction to everything she had initially stood for, and it really made me think. It wasn't about the money itself. It was about the inconsistency in her beliefs, the way she applied her ideals so selectively. This was just one instance, but it was a pattern that started to become clearer over time. The inconsistency with the bill splitting was just the beginning. It started to show up in other parts of our life together, especially around our apartment. Cooking was always my thing. I actually enjoy it, and it fits with what I do professionally, so I preferred to cook. Dishes, on the other hand, were Luna's thing. We had agreed on that from early on. It seemed like a fair division of household chores. But then, sometimes, Luna would get lazy. She wouldn't do the dishes. And when I would gently bring it up, or if she just didn't feel like doing them, she would say something that really baffled me. She would say, "So patriarchal to expect women to clean." I just couldn't understand that reason. It made no sense to me. I had just cooked the meal, so who was cleaning? If she was tired, she could just tell me directly. I would have understood. I would have helped. But using patriarchy as an excuse to skip chores felt like she was just trying to avoid responsibility. It felt like a deflection, and honestly, it showed a certain insecurity in her arguments. It wasn't about fairness anymore. It was about convenience for her. And then there was the most contradictory thing, how she treated other women. She talked so much about empowering women, about supporting them, but her actions often did the opposite. If we were out and an attractive girl passed by or was mentioned, Luna would immediately assume she was using her looks to get ahead. She would make dismissive comments, almost judgmental, that seemed so out of step with the principles she claimed to uphold. It was confusing to witness. She spoke about empowering women, but then she would undermine other women with her words and reality. It felt like her definition of equality and female empowerment was very selective, applied only when it fit her narrative or her personal gain. These instances, small on their own, started to build up. They created a growing feeling of unease in me, a sense that the person I thought I knew was perhaps very different from who she truly was. I valued honesty, and this felt dishonest. All these inconsistencies, the way Luna's words often didn't match her actions, really started to weigh on me. It felt like her version of equality was something she could adjust to fit whatever situation was most convenient for her. I knew I couldn't just keep letting these things go. I value open communication in a relationship, and I felt like we needed to talk about it. So I tried. I really did. I brought it up to her carefully, trying to explain how I felt without making her feel attacked. I told her that sometimes I felt like her version of feminism was more like picking and choosing what benefited her. I wanted her to understand that it wasn't about undermining her values. It was about seeking genuine fairness between us. I believed in true equality, and this felt like a departure from it. Her reaction, though, was not what I had hoped for. She got super defensive. Instead of listening to what I was saying, she immediately accused me of being a male chauvinist. She said I was trying to undermine her values. It felt like a brick wall. The conversation just stopped dead. There was no real discussion, no attempt to understand my perspective. It was just an immediate defense, a turning of the tables, making me out to be the bad guy for even bringing it up. That's when I realized I don't really know what to do. I had tried to talk to her, to express my concerns, but it went nowhere. It just made things more tense. The idea that she could casually dismiss my feelings and label me like that was disheartening. It showed me that perhaps we weren't as aligned as I initially thought. The relationship, which started with so much promise and a shared belief in positive ideals, was starting to feel messy. It wasn't about the small things anymore, the $5 beer versus the $20 cocktail, or who did the dishes. It was about a fundamental difference in how we approached honesty and fairness. I found myself thinking more and more that I should just end this relationship now, before it gets even more complicated and more hurtful. I really didn't plan to have children after marriage, so that wasn't a factor in my decision. This was purely about finding a relationship built on. The conversation with Luna about her views, or rather the lack of a real conversation, left me feeling incredibly frustrated. It was clear that trying to discuss the inconsistencies in her principles was futile. Every attempt I made to express my feelings was met with defensiveness and accusations. She immediately called me a male chauvinist and claimed I was trying to undermine her values. It felt like a deliberate way to shut down any real discussion, to make me feel bad for even bringing it up. I had always believed that a healthy relationship needed open dialogue, even about difficult topics. I had gone into this relationship, honestly, looking for someone who shared my values of fairness and equality. When we initially met, she was so vocal about equality, women's rights, and was positive in general. That was a big part of what attracted me to her. But now it felt like those initial ideals were just a facade, or at least something she applied very selectively. The pattern was undeniable. She insisted on splitting all bills 50-50 because she doesn't need a man to pay for her. I was fine with that. I'm all for equality. But then, when her $20 cocktail was on the bill next to my $5 beer, she still wanted it split evenly. And when I suggested taking turns paying, she immediately shifted, saying, "Men earn more on average, so you should cover more." It was bewildering. What happened to equality? And it wasn't just about money. The household chores were another example. Cooking was my thing related to my profession, so I preferred to cook. Dishes were her thing, but if she was feeling lazy, she would just say, "So patriarchal to expect women to clean." It didn't make any sense. If I cooked, who was supposed to clean? I didn't understand this reason. If she was tired, she could just tell me. Using patriarchy as a reason to skip chores just showed her insecurity. These inconsistencies, these shifting goalposts, made the relationship feel very unstable. I had tried to talk to her about this. I had said that sometimes I felt like her version of feminism was more like picking and choosing what benefits her. But it always ended the same way, with her getting super defensive. I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells, trying to avoid triggering another accusation. It was exhausting. The most frustrating part of all this was how Luna treated other women. She would constantly talk about empowering women and standing up for them, but then her actions would contradict her words completely. If an attractive girl was mentioned, or if we saw someone out, Luna would immediately assume she was using her looks to get ahead. She would make these quick, dismissive judgments that felt so out of line with what she claimed to believe. It was baffling to me. How could you advocate for women's rights and then be so critical and judgmental of other women, especially based on something as superficial as their appearance? It felt hypocritical. It was as if her support for women was conditional, reserved only for those who fit a certain mold she approved of, or perhaps those she didn't see as a threat. This judgmental behavior bothered me deeply. It wasn't just a private thought. Sometimes she would voice these opinions aloud, and it made me uncomfortable, but showed a side of her that was far from the positive, inclusive person I thought I had met. I had come to believe that truly strong people lift others up, not tear them down. Her words felt like the opposite of empowerment. I tried to address this too, during one of our attempts at a serious conversation. I gently pointed out that her actions towards other women sometimes seemed to contradict her stated beliefs about empowering women. I wanted her to see the disconnect, to understand how it felt to me. But again, I was met with the same defensiveness. She would just brush it off or turn it back on me, accusing me of misunderstanding or being judgmental myself. It was exhausting to constantly feel this disconnect between her words and her actions. It made me question everything about our relationship, about the person I was sharing my life with. The constant criticism of others, combined with her selective application of her own principles, painted a picture of someone who wasn't truly living by the values she espoused. And for me, honesty and consistency in values are incredibly important in a partner. This growing realization made the thought of ending the relationship feel less like a drastic measure and more like a necessary step for my own peace. The arguments we had, or rather, the one-sided discussions that always turned into accusations, became exhausting. I had tried to talk to her about the inconsistencies I saw. I had said that sometimes I felt like her version of feminism was more like picking and choosing what benefits her. But every time, she got super defensive. She would immediately say I was a male chauvinist and that I was trying to undermine her values. It was like she couldn't hear any criticism, even when it was offered gently and with concern. This pattern of defensiveness meant that nothing ever got resolved. The issues would just linger, festering beneath the surface. It made me realize that open communication, which I value so highly in a relationship, wasn't really possible with Luna when it came to these deeper conflicts. It was always her way, her interpretation, and any attempt to offer a different perspective was met with immediate resistance and personal attacks. I thought about all the small things that had built up, the way she insisted on splitting bills 50-50, but then wanted me to cover more because men earn more on average, the way she'd use "so patriarchal to expect women to clean" as an excuse to avoid dishes, even though I cooked, and her quick judgment of other attractive women, assuming they were using their looks to get ahead. All these actions felt so disconnected from the strong, positive advocate for equality she initially presented herself as. It became clear to me that this wasn't just about small disagreements. It was about a fundamental misalignment in values. I believe in genuine equality, where both partners contribute fairly and consistently, and where principles are applied universally, not selectively. What I was experiencing felt like hypocrisy, and it was draining my energy and my spirit. I really didn't know what to do. I had tried to talk to her. I had voiced my concerns. But when every attempt at honest discussion leads to defensiveness and accusations, you reach a point where you have to consider your own well-being. I started to think that I should just end this relationship now before it gets messy. I didn't plan to have children after marriage, so that wasn't a complicating factor. It was purely about whether I could build a respectful, equitable future with someone whose actions consistently contradicted her words. The answer, slowly but surely, was becoming clear to me. The realization that I needed to end my relationship with Luna didn't come in a sudden flash, but rather through a slow, quiet accumulation of inconsistencies and unanswered attempts at communication. I had genuinely believed in the person I met, someone who was so vocal about equality, women's rights, and generally positive. That was important to me. But over time, I started to feel like some of her views were less about actual feminism. It began with the little things, like her insistence on splitting all bills 50-50 because she doesn't need a man to pay for her. That worked for me. I'm all for equality. Yet when the bill included her $20 cocktail and my $5 beer, she still wanted it split evenly. And then, out of nowhere, when I suggested we take turns paying, she'd say, "Well, men earn more on average, so you should cover more. What happened to equality?" It felt like she was picking and choosing what benefited her. The same pattern showed up with household chores. Cooking was my thing, related to my profession, so I preferred to cook. Dishes were her thing, but if she got lazy, she would just say, "So patriarchal to expect women to clean." I didn't understand this reason. If she was tired, she could just tell me. Using patriarchy as a reason to skip chores just showed her insecurity. And the most hypocritical thing was how she treated other women. If a girl was attractive, she'd immediately assume she was using her looks to get ahead. She talked about empowering women, but did the opposite in reality. I had tried to talk to her about all of this. I had said that sometimes I felt like her version of feminism was more like picking and choosing what benefits her. But she got super defensive, saying I was a male chauvinist and trying to undermine her values. The conversations always ended there. I realized I didn't really know what to do. The relationship was becoming messy. I understood then that a healthy, respectful partnership cannot be built on such shifting sands of convenience and blame. I had no plans to have children after marriage, so that wasn't a factor. This was simply about finding true mutual respect and fairness. I decided I should just end the relationship now before it got messier. It was a difficult decision, but it became clear that for my own peace and emotional well-being, it was the necessary step. I learned that true principles demand consistent application,